Years ago, our gods were in the sky we gazed upon. They were the fire in our hearths and in the very air we breathed. We prayed to our gods for wisdom, courage, and protection. We spoke their names aloud with pride and held festivals to honor them. Until one day, another came and claimed the superiority of his god, telling tales of the miracles his son performed while living, and how through his death, all our wrongdoings were absolved. Temples to this god and his son were built, and more flocked to the Christ God for the promise of an eternity, where the only price to pay was belief. Our temples grew empty, offerings made less frequently, if at all. Believers forced to believe in the Christ God and denounce Odin, Frigg, Freya, Thor, and the rest, until eventually those left who still believed had to do so in secret, clinging to the beliefs that held lands together for generations. Eventually those who still believed, those who worshipped in secret, were forced out and exposed, and the faith that bound communities, inflamed hearts, and breathed life into the very soil went. Nearly a millennia later, the old ways call us home, and the Christ God seeks to threaten its resurgence. Warning! The content provided in this episode may be viewed as offensive to some. If you or anyone you know is offended by this episode or the bulk of this podcast, we recommend going to your nearest religious institution or windowless room where the ills of the world cannot harm your piteously fragile way of thinking. You have been warned. Greetings, wanderers of paths less traveled, and welcome back to I Am Heathen, and So Can You. I am your host, Einar, and tonight we'll be dispensing with the jokier intro I usually do in place of a warning. Initially, I made a promise to myself that I would not take I Am Heathen, and So Can You in a political direction in any way, shape, or form. And yet, here we are. The one thing I do is listen. And when other pagans speak, and when the same topic appears over and over again in these conversations, I find myself compelled to speak. I want to make something perfectly clear. This is not a Republican issue, a Democrat issue, and neither is this a liberal and conservative issue. This boils down to pagans versus non-pagans. And the side of the aisle you stand on has little to do with it. In 2025, among the pagan and witch communities, there is a genuine fear that Christianity will see itself become the state religion of the United States of America. And despite First Amendment prohibitions preventing the establishment of an official religion and official religious tests for political office, there has been a rise in Christian fundamentalism and nationalism. Both sides of that coin would like to see more, if not all forms of Christian values, become set in stone as the bedrock of American society. While Christian fundamentalism seeks to live life as close to the Bible as humanly allowable, allegedly, it is Christian nationalism that operates under the notion that this country was established as a Christian state. Despite the fact that this country was founded by a mixture of European faiths, Anglicans, Catholics, Quakers, Puritans, and our very first American president being Anglican himself, our nation was never founded upon Christian values. I've said repeatedly that assholes exist in every religious space, no matter what you do. And the only way to gauge the danger of any firebrand in question, simply stick your ear out and see how loud they are, i.e., Pastor Gregory Locke, Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar, Peter Popoff, and now Pastor Lucas Miles, the author of The Pagan Threat, with the foreword of that book being written by the late Charlie Kirk. Now, before I share excerpts from Kirk's foreword, I have to point out there are pagans and witches who stand to the right of my firmly planted centrist feet, who feel it in their moral obligation to rage about Charlie Kirk's passing. Now, before anyone listening to this makes the conscious decision to dogpile me and insinuate I give space to his rhetoric, on the day of Charlie Kirk's passing, I was given a video that was filmed entirely too close up. I watched that round enter his neck. I also watched that man's life empty to the floor below him. And I didn't celebrate. I felt pure and outright horror for what I witnessed, as while I do not operate the pagan equivalent of Turning Point USA, I am a person on the internet who shares his opinion and beliefs and speaks with other people regarding their beliefs. And as such, if someone felt so inclined to want to attack me for the way I live my life, the way I believe, they very well readily could. I very firmly believe not a soul on Midgard should take a bullet over a difference of opinion. I will, however, say that given freedom of speech, that amendment we laud about so damn much is a two-way street. Sure, you have the right to speak your piece, regardless of how inflammatory it may be. But we sure as hell on the other side of the coin have the right to challenge your rhetoric. There is nothing new under the sun, Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes. What is experienced today has been experienced before. That's good to know, Kirk continues, because in today's America, the Christian faithful are faced with a terrifying and broad array of threats and dangers. He then goes on to claim that societal decency is exclusively a Christian invention, even going so far as to say that even atheists benefit from this society. The forces of modernity are fighting fanatically to restore the moral order prior to Christianity, aka the moral order of the pagans. Kirk claims that in the pagan world, the individual had no bearing on society, and that schmabortion, I'm saying this live on TikTok, I have to talk like I'm four, infanticide and human schmacrifice held extreme sway in pagan society, even claiming slavery as a pagan invention, conveniently ignoring the fact that nations of the faithful, such as Portugal and Spain, cornered the market on the transatlantic slave trade as early as the 1500s, with quite a large swath of Christian Europe at that time practicing or facilitating slavery in some way. What struck me as damn near amusing reading Kirk's forward is equating pagan worship to concepts such as progressivism, tolerance, and social justice as pagan only concepts. When if you were to hop on any major social media platform and type in hashtag progressive clergy, you would find a myriad of truly good and welcoming of all walks of life Christians who, unfortunately, under Mr. Kirk's metrics, these people aren't good Christians because they aren't doing enough to spread the gospel according to Christian supremacy, claiming that people who have left the church. And here's some real interesting statistics. Mind you, these only bear to us here in the US, but hey, American pagan here. 127 million people as of 2025 no longer identify as Christian in the United States. 100 million point nine people as of 2024 are religiously unaffiliated. 24 million people as of 2023 identify as being part of non Christian faiths. 1.4 million people as of 2025 identify as being pagan. There is a reason that this last piece of data is so low. Due to the decentralized nature of many pagan paths and fear of being shunned and ostracized, a lot of people don't disclose their spiritual identity as pagans. And I would attribute that to the perception of pagan belief at the hands of Abrahamic religions. My first questions to the pagans who plant themselves to the right of me, who expressed rage at the death of Charlie Kirk, I would want to ask how you feel knowing these statements are contained within this book. Knowing that a person you lionized, like every other Christian, to throw shade your way, calling you evil, dark, demonic, and of the devil. I also have to point out in his foreword in the Pagan Threat, Kirk stated that the rise of social justice innocuously paved the way for paganism. When Hi, even the Jew who took an interest in Christian theology knew that Jesus himself was a champion of social justice. Healing the sick, showing compassion for the vulnerable, and advocating for the poor, the blind, and the condemned. When I hear these things, I don't see a man of conviction speaking of a faith that unites 60% of this country. I see an ancient Roman in Judea among the many who condemned Christ for these acts of compassion. I will say, as I've had this discussion with Christians in the past, I firmly believe that people wholeheartedly pervert doctrine. And if all Christianity was boiled down to and practiced as live your life to be more like Christ, the world would be a truly better place. Some of you are probably thinking, hey Einar, why is the Jew turned Norse pagan advocating for Christians and against them at the same time? The answer is simple. Number one, good Christians do exist. The people who look out for their fellow man, and the people who are into that whole love thy neighbor thing, not me, those guys suck. And B, the shit that Lucas Miles is preaching and Charlie Kirk backed up is a form of Christianity in the extreme and is not what millions of Americans who go to church for every Sunday. Very much like those Christians who aren't Lucas Miles or Charlie Kirk, pagans just want to go on about our lives and, simply put, be left the fuck alone. To practice and believe in any way we see fit, yet here we are with a pastor claiming that being Christ-like, being a voice for the downtrodden, advocating for those who can't do it themselves, in and of itself is inherently pagan and somehow counterproductive to American values. While Norse paganism, that is my spiritual path, and it will serve as the litmus test of my argument, I posed at the top of this thing that assholes exist in religious spaces no matter where you go. And given Norse paganism is a small facet of the larger pagan community in America, our assholes happen to be particularly virulent. But at the very least, they have the common decency to be out loud about the bullshit they spew. I'm looking at you, Stephen McNallen. I'm looking at you, Matthew Flavel. McNallen was bright enough to at one point utter the words, "The Allies winning World War II stripped Germany of its warrior spirit." And sidebar, because this is one of my absolutely favorite funny stories. When the riots in Virginia occurred, multiple people who were members of the FA were there with AFA banners, and Shane Smith of Vice decided to reach out to Matthew Flavel for an interview, and he consented. And it was a by satellite interview. And the minute Flavel agreed to come on screen, the reporter that Vice put on satellite was a woman of color. And you watch Matthew Flavel's lily white face just go, shit. And it was the most hilariously uncomfortable 14 to 15-minute interview of my life. It was hilarious. But back on the whole Stephen McNallen thing, that rhetoric is so inflammatory. It's got a bunch of old German men going, I think he has the right idea. With the exception of assholes like that and people who operate under the delusion that Germany didn't lose the war, we are an inclusive religion, a faith that doesn't care who you are, what you identify as. We care that you're here. That inclusivity, however, comes to a screeching fucking halt if you hurt that semblance of inclusivity. Personally, I initially wanted to go into this with an answer, a bow to put on this thing. That would be a severe act of ego to admit that I'm that wise when I'm not. In the immortal words of Jango Fett, I am a simple man making his way through the galaxy like my fathers before me. What I can convey, however, is my hopes for the future of paganism in America. It will be a tremendously hard-traveled road before blanket acceptance becomes the order of the day. I also had to check my pagan privilege at the door, knowing that I'm an American pagan in the northern states, where religion doesn't influence daily life as dramatically as it does for our southern cousins. I also know that religion can become intertwined with family as a means of bonding, and when someone feels as though the religion of their family failed to convey and deliver much sought meaning, and that person finds truth elsewhere, it can be a large blow to a family when someone finds truth elsewhere. I want to initially have pagans everywhere be utterly unafraid to express their spirituality. I'd like to see it give them strength inwardly and outwardly. Some may see this as simple idealism, as delusional even, but I acknowledge fully there's a hell of a lot of work that needs to be done in the name of not just lifting the veil, but tossing the fucker on the ground and stomping it into the dirt. We are here. There's 1.4 million of us, and how many of us are not okay with expressing our spirituality for fear of being ostracized, or worse? Two phrases come to mind from the Hellenist YouTuber Eliakai. We're stronger together, and faith ain't fear. But as of right now, a lot of us aren't comfortable being out loud and proud about it. And while I wish that weren't the case, I want this podcast, this episode, to be a message of hope in the darkness that a lot of people find themselves in. This faith changed my life in ways I'm still coming to realize. It's been nothing but my desire to give back to the faith that gave so much to me. If I were to suggest any semblance of advice to be being the pagan solution to the Christian threat, sit down to a meal with a Christian friend and have a conversation. While it may not be the thing to put an end to hate, to put an end to the stigma we face as pagans, it all starts on the individual level. Those singular individual conversations eventually become larger and larger, and next thing you know, a Christian doesn't see you as a pagan, and you don't see a Christian as a Christian, but rather people of different faiths. While they may be different beliefs, coexistence is possible, if not downright achievable. If you're in a position to be an activist, an advocate, a voice for the voiceless as a pagan, I highly suggest you go out there and speak up. Be the Christ-like pagan deluded pastors see fit to condemn us as. Be the pagan solution to the Christian threat. That, my friends, is all the time we have for today. This episode was a tough one to write, but when faced with issues like this, pagans of every stripe should stand up and use their voices if they're able. If you'd like to connect with us on a more personal level, you can find me on TikTok at Chef Einar Blackthorn on Instagram. I am on Instagram and TikTok. I am Heathen Pod. That's I am Heathen Pod. The Patreon is still currently under construction, but once it's done, a big announcement will drop. Tune in this Thursday. In fact, tune in all Thursdays at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for all your heathen centric drive time content. As per our usual tradition, if you've got a drink in your hand, which for sake of argument, hi, raise that fucker high and repeat after me. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the spirits, hail the ancestors, and most importantly, hail yourselves. This has been a Blackthorn production.